If you are a pen tester, then you already know this. Finding vulnerabilities is only half of the battle. The real challenge is getting your clients to actually understand and act on your findings. I've reviewed and written hundreds of pen test reports over the years, and I'll be honest, most of them are terrible. They're either too technical for management to understand it, or it's just too vague for technical teams to take action. Today, I'm going to show you exactly how to write a professional pen test report that both executives and technical teams will actually report and implement. And speaking of professional reports, this video is brought to you by our sponsor, Plextrack. They have built an amazing platform that helps pen testers create stunning professional reports in half the time. But more on that later. For now, let's talk about what makes a truly professional pen test report. But before we dive in, if you're new here, let me introduce myself very quickly. Hi, my name is Ben, and I've been doing bug bounties for over a decade now. And since 2018, I've gone into pen testing more, and I have written reports with clients ranging from tiny startups to Fortune 500 giants, and even help secure government infrastructure. Now, let's talk about why report structure matters. See, a pen test report isn't just a document, it's a communication bridge between you and multiple audiences. Think about it this way. Your report is actually going to be used by a number of different people in that organization. You have your C-level executives who might only read the first few pages, your security teams who need to prioritize these fixes, developers who need technical details to actually fix the issue, and then you also have your project managers who need to track down remediations, and sometimes compliance teams who need to show auditors. Each of these people need different information from you in your report. And if you don't structure it properly, then your findings may never get fixed, no matter how critical or urgent they are. Let me show you exactly how I structure my reports, and here's my template section by section. First up, every professional report needs these key elements. You're going to have your company logo and your company name, then your client's name and logo, a report title like Internal Network Pen Test Findings Report, the date of the assessment, and a solid confidentiality statement. This statement isn't just a legal boilerplate. It needs to clearly state that the information is privileged and cannot be distributed without explicit and written consent. This protects you and your client in case of any future issues. Next, we've got our document control section. This may seem basic, but it is really important. You want to have a version history showing each change that you have made with a specific date or the creation date for it. Then you also want to include a clear author and their attribution. And then you want to wrap it all up with a contact information for both parties. And I mean full name and contact info, not just names. Sometimes you may even have to include a phone number here to make communications easier. Now, let's look at the table of contents. This isn't just a list. It is actually a roadmap for your readers. Starting with the overview section, you need to lay out exactly what it is that you did. Here's how I do mine. I start with my testing timeline from this date to this date. Then I talk about the assessment type, whether it was internal, web apps, whatever it is, and then our access method. And then we specify every single framework that we may have used. For example, you may use OWASP Testing Guide version 5. And of course, you want to include any customized testing approach that you may have within your organization. The methodology section, on the other hand, is where you start to show off your plan. You explain that you're not just randomly picking at system. You break it down into your clear phases that you use to do your pen test. Mine typically goes through these 4 different phases. Starting with our planning, this is where we scope objectives and coordinate with our stakeholders. Then we move on to our reconnaissance. During this phase, we map out the entire target environment to understand the architecture, and we also identify potential entry points through both passive and active information gathering. Then we also determine if there are any other user roles and access levels that may exist that we'll need to test out. Then obviously you want to move on to your testing, both automated with tools and your manual verification. And then we move on to our reporting and analysis, where this is where we come up with our actionable recommendations. And you don't want to forget about your scope section. Your scope section clearly defines what you did and what you didn't test. I like to keep mine very simple and clear. Usually it's just a table, for instance, listing out the IP ranges or domains or applications that were in scope. This section serves 2 important purposes. It gives your technical teams clear boundaries of what was tested, and it protects you by explicitly documenting what wasn't included in the assessment. Trust me, you don't want to have a client coming back 6 months later asking why you didn't find a specific issue on a system when that system wasn't even in your scope. Now, let's talk about how to structure your executive summary, because this is one of the most important parts of your reports. This is where you need to be extremely organized and clear. I break mine into 4 main components, and each one serves as a specific purpose. Let's start with your executive summary opener. This is where you provide a high-level overview that explains how you conducted your assessment. Keep it simple, explain your access methods and testing approach. Remember, executives need to understand how you tested their environments, but they don't need all the technical details. Next comes your testing summary. This is where you lay out what you have found at a high level. Start by stating when and what type of testing you performed. Then present the total number of findings and their severity levels. Here's where you will highlight the most critical issues you have discovered and give them a brief overview of any systematic weaknesses you have identified. Wrap this section with a statement about the overall security posture, but remember to balance the positives with areas that need improvement. Then we want to move off to the key observations, which breaks down into 2 crucial parts. First, the strength section. Here you want to highlight 3 to 4 notable security measures that demonstrates the client's security maturity. Be specific and focus on systematic strength, not just one-off good practices. Second, the weakness section. This is where you need to break down your concerns into clear categories. For each category, make sure you have a clear heading and explain why it is a systematic issue by providing context and showing the broader security impact on the organization. Finally, your recommendation section. This isn't just a list of fixes, it is a strategic roadmap for improvements. Think about organizing your recommendations into key areas. For each recommendation, explain what systematic issue is going to address, what steps they need to take, and why it is a priority, and what challenges they might face during implementation. Remember, your executive summary isn't just a summary, it is telling the story of your assessment and setting the stage for all the technical details that follow. Now, let's look at how we rate and present our findings. The finding severity ratings section is something that I include in my reports because it just sets up the standardized way to communicate risks. I use CVSS scoring because it is an industry standard that everybody else also understands. So think of it as a universal language for security risk from critical all the way down to informational findings. This rating system leads directly into our vulnerability summary section, which acts as a bridge between your executive summary and the detailed technical findings. It's your findings at a glance, giving both management and technical teams a clear overview of what needs to be fixed and in what order. The key here is balance. Include enough details for teams to start planning remediation, but keep it concise enough that executives can quickly understand the scope of work needed. When it comes to the technical findings section, each vulnerability needs to tell a complete story. Let's start with 2 elements that I think often gets overlooked, but it is absolutely important: the finding ID and the title. The finding ID creates a common language between you and your client. Using a consistent format like ECIPF 001 makes it very easy for everyone to reference specific issues in emails, meetings, or even in remediation discussions. This also prevents any confusion when someone says that specific LDAP issue, for example, and this way everyone knows exactly what vulnerability you are talking about. The title also needs to tell a story at a glance. Instead of writing something vague like LDAP exposure, be specific. Expose LDAP credentials and database backups due to directory listing. When someone scans the vulnerability summary, they should immediately understand what each finding is about. For each finding, then you will need to include several key elements. Start with a risk rating that matches your severity system. We need to specify exactly which host and URLs are affected. Be precise about where the issue exists. This is very, very important. Then you want to write a detailed descriptions of what you have found, backed by solid evidence. Include clear numbered steps to reproduce the issue, and obviously you want to provide an actionable remediation guidance. Think of each finding as a self-contained story. Someone should be able to understand, verify, and fix the issue just from this section. Now, let me show you what this looks like in practice. I'll use two examples from my real reports. I've just anonymized them for client privacy reasons. The first one is an LDAP credential exposure finding. We didn't just write found exposed credentials. Instead, we detailed exactly what we found, the 8 IP addresses that were associated with it, and then also we listed all of the different paths that could lead to potential credentials or the vulnerabilities that we had access to. Or take the Splunk vulnerability, a path traversal issue in a specific version of Splunk Enterprise on Windows. We included the exact version affected, the vulnerable endpoint, step-by-step reproduction step, and a clear remediation guidance, including specific vendor updates to apply to that system. So there you have it. That is a complete guide for writing a professional pen test report that actually drives action. Again, remember, a lot of this content that I've created is hard to put together, especially because I'm trying to anonymize my pen test report without using a client's name. And I'm also trying to pull different sections from different reports to kind of make sense of it for those of you guys that are watching this video. So if the content of the report looks a little bit weird, it is kind of AI generated because I wanted to be able to get different pieces to just kind of show you a outline of what an exact report looks like. Now, let me show you how our sponsor Plextrack can help streamline this entire process so you don't have to actually just customize and write every single bit of this report on your own. You can actually use their platform and write a report in less than the time that it takes to probably watch this entire video. So the first thing we're going to want to do here is go to our clients and just add our first client. I'm just going to quickly use a Hacking Hub logo. We're going to enter our client's name. If there's a point of contact we want to specify, we can just do something like hello@hackinghub.com for the email address. And then for the name, we can put their name. We're going to do John Doe. And if there's a client description, we can put like Hacking Hub is a learning platform. So we have that also in there as a part of it. We're going to submit this really quickly. It's going to take us to our clients. We can quickly search for it and then go into our client and start our first report. Now we're going to type in our report name. I'm just going to call this one Findings Report. We can also do something like Internal Network Pen Test Findings Report. We're going to leave that in draft because we're not done with it. If you have a template import already, the cool thing about Plextrack is that it allows you to use them. So I'm going to just use this OWASP template that we have. And then we're just going to scroll down to the operator. So if there's someone I want to select, I'm just going to select myself. Then I'm going to put a start date. This is the testing date that we started. I'm going to change this to September. So now we have September 2nd. And then we're going to make the end date November 30th, for example, or October 30th. If there are reviewers, we can add that. But the cool thing here is that if you have a custom template right here, it will also ask you for the different fields that it has. So if I wanted to put my team name, if there's an acronym for the company, I can put it there. If there's an author, I can put Ben S. I can put John D. And if there's email, I can put john@hackinghub.com. Or if it's my email, actually, I can put @gmail.com, for example. And then company name. And if I want to remove something, so let's say I don't want to put the company address on there, I can just remove it, hit submit, and start our report, which pre-fills everything that you know you're going to have to use regardless of your customer. So no matter who the customer is, you're going to have a confidentiality notice. You're going to have your limitations, for example. Maybe you have something about your team, you have your timeline. All that is always maybe going to stay the same. So you can just quickly import it using this feature on Plextrack, which saves me a lot of time because I don't have to worry about styling, copying, pasting from documents. So it is all there and I can just reuse them as we go. Now, let's say you wanted to actually edit this. You can go to your narrative and this is going to list all the different sections you have. And now let's say you wanted to import something else, or maybe you want to create one of these narratives. You can go to your narrative DB. I'm using test for it, for example, and you can start to actually make these on your own. So for example, if I want to use my overview every time that I do it, this is the overview that I've created that I could be reused throughout all of my pen test reports. And if I go back to the report itself, I can go in here and add an overview by going to add narrative from DB and looking for my overview right here and just adding this section, which will automatically import it. And I can just look for it and kind of just put it where I want. So maybe I want my overview to come up before my methodology. And now we have our entire report ready and we can fill out some of these custom things like our scope and the notes for each scope and get it done. So this was just the section about creating the template for a report, but now we need to talk about the findings. The findings section is where you're able to create findings for each of the vulnerabilities that you have identified. And the cool thing with this findings is that it relies on WriteUpsDB. WriteUpsDB could be the place where you store all of your templates for each of those findings. So for example, I have a stored XSS template. So you can see it explains what it is and what the recommendations are and what is the reference for it. And I've also created one for the Splunk path traversal that is based on my report right here. You can see that I've created it. It doesn't have the URL obviously, but because I know that I may come across this vulnerability multiple times, I can just have it in my WriteUpsDB and use it every time I'm filing a report. So now I'm going to go back to my Pentest report, click on add findings and go from WriteUpsDB and look for the exact XSS that I had. Or maybe I want to do Splunk actually. We're going to import this and we're going to add one write-up and we can go to it, edit this, and easily now I can just name this however I want. So if my title here was Splunk vulnerable to path traversal, I can just make it Splunk Enterprise on the host that we want to put is vulnerable to path traversal, allowing to read local files on the machine, for example. Then we can click the status as we wanted to. If there's a priority, we can add it to it. I usually just click these high, medium, critical. It just makes it easier. A lot of times I've seen that we don't need to have a CVSS score. It just makes it easier. And we can just fill this in. So if I have the URL, I can go into here and add it to our description by creating a steps to reproduce. And now we have everything that we want all under the same exact page. If you also want to go a step further, you can add the affected assets. So if the asset isn't in here, you can create an asset and we can call it Splunk Enterprise, for example. And if there's a parent for it, we can do that. If there's system owners, so if you're working with your clients, you want to tag those people, you can add them in here. You have all that capability of putting everybody here, but you can also put the IP address, for example, of the host and all the information and description for it, and click next and save it. Just select this to add it to our report. We can actually go a step further and add a screenshot by dragging our screenshot into it and then just giving it Splunk POC, for example. And now we have a complete view of this finding. And if I go to it now, this is what it would look like. We have our steps to reproduce, we have our screenshots, we have the asset for it, and all the recommendations. And I didn't have to write all this one by one manually. All I have to do is import a template once and use it as many times as I want, which is probably the thing that I do the most, especially with vulnerabilities like XSS that I know I find a lot on my clients. I don't have to rewrite everything. All I have to do is add 3 lines that just has the reproduction steps, and everything else is just in my database with my WriteUpsDB. So this is kind of what it looks like so far. The other thing that I really like is the attack path. Let's say you have multiple reports that you want to connect. It actually gives you the ability to drop them together and just connect these dots and show an entire attack path that is possible. So for example, if you find credentials on one asset, use them to authenticate to this other asset, and then on this asset you find an RCE, you can just connect the 3 and show them how they're related, and they can decide which one to fix first and how to prioritize them once that report is done. And the last thing I want to do here is I want to just quickly show you what this report looks like when we actually export it. And now that we're all done, let's just export this. I'm going to again use one of the templates that I have in here in my demo environment. I'm just going to use a single scope web app. I'm going to export it. It's going to create this entire report for us, give us a docx file. And if we open it up, it's going to look something similar to this. And you can see it has the entire design. I'm using one of their designs, which looks really cool. But also if you scroll down, you can see all the data that we put in has been imported, including the company name, the disclaimer, limitations, the scope. Everything we saw on the platform is in this documentation. And what's really cool about it is that if we go at the bottom, we have auto-generated all of our critical findings. It has created our entire table of contents with the bugs that we have. So for example, this Splunk Enterprise, it has a title, it has a severity for it, and of course it has the recommendations at a high glance. And if we go into the detailed findings, since this is the only bug that I filed for this one, you can see that it has numbered it for us with the title, with all the information necessary, including the CVE details that I don't have to manually enter. You can see it has a CVE name, the year, the ID, and also a link to the cve.org website that carries all of the information that we need for our findings. So there it is. Those are the 2 approaches that I take to write a pen test report. I used to use my templates before I had a tool like FlexTrack because it was just what I was used to. But now having access to a platform like this, it just saves me a ton of time. I don't have to rewrite everything a million times, especially when I have a massive pen test that has 60, 70 reports. than have to just go through it and rewrite the same report over and over and over. So it saves you a lot of time, but that is just something that I've been incorporating recently. You have the option to do both. So go down in the description, download my template if you want, use it however you want. Just remember that it's not just my responsibility if something is missing in your pen test report. All right, that's it. Do me a favor, drop me a comment. Let me know if you like content like this. Do you want me to make more content about pen testing specifically? Do you want to see more tools that could help you with pen testing and bug bounty hunting? Drop it all down below in the comments, and I will see you all in next week's video. Peace.